Lieutenant Bruce W. Carr was an American ace, yet the only story most people know about him is about when he was shot down and stole a German plane to fly back to his base. It's the greatest escape in aviation history, except it never happened. The story of Lieutenant Carr's escape is well documented. There are countless articles about it, photos, and even a video that shows him the day he landed the German plane back at his base. There's a Wikipedia entry with full citations, and Hollywood even repurposed his story for a film. The essential elements of the story are that in either October or November of 1944, while Lieutenant Carr was serving as a pilot with the 354th Fighter Group, he was shot down by flak while on a ground attack mission against a Luftwaffe air base in Czechoslovakia. He parachuted to safety and hid in a nearby forest, hoping to escape capture. After several days on the run, however, he realized that he had little hope of making it back to friendly lines, so he decided to turn himself in at the very Luftwaffe air base he had attacked a few days before. As night fell, he arrived at the German air base. By coincidence, he found himself directly across from a German airplane that was parked under the trees. The plane was a Focke-Wulf FW-190A8, one of Germany's most advanced single-seat fighters. He watched as two Luftwaffe ground crewmen topped off the fuel tanks and then did an engine run-up. When they walked away, they left the plane unguarded and ready to fly. He realized then that he could just take it and fly back to rejoin his unit in France. When the sun was down and the base had turned in for the night, he crept forward and climbed into the plane's cockpit. He was met by a bewildering array of switches, controls, gauges, and dials that surrounded him. Only the stick, throttle, and rudder pedals seemed familiar. Worse yet, it was all labeled in German and in the metric system. He didn't know kilometers from miles, nor meters from feet. He had no idea how to get it started, much less fly it. And of course, there was no checklist. Undeterred, for the rest of the night he studied the cockpit. The best he could do was make educated guesses based on what he knew from his P-51. He had worked out most of it by dawn, but then he saw the first signs of German activity on the field. He was out of time. It was then or never. He turned on the master power switch, set the fuel selectors to the main tanks, and set the magnetos to what he thought was both. When he pulled up on the starter handle, the engine came to life. He glanced up to see some Germans walking toward the plane, so he gunned the throttle. The plane careened out of the trees, and he pointed it between two hangars, pushed the throttle forward, and hoped that beyond he'd find the runway. The plane accelerated, the tail came up, and just like that, he was flying. He pulled up the gear handle, and the wheels retracted. Then he flew away at treetop level. He was 200 miles from his base in France, alone, in a German fighter plane, and without a parachute. As he crossed the front line, American flak opened up. It all missed. Soldiers on the ground raised their rifles to shoot at him too. They knew a German plane when they saw one. Hoping to slip through, he stayed down at treetop level. About 40 minutes later, he spotted a familiar landmark, made a final course change, and came to his airbase. Down below, the 354th Fighter Group was just waking up when they saw a German fighter plane coming in straight at them in what looked like a strafing attack. The base's air defense unit sprinted for their guns. Carr chopped the throttle, pitched up to bleed off speed, then rolled to pull the nose back down toward the runway. He reached to lower the landing gear, but found the lever locked in place. He had no choice but to belly it in with the wheels still up. The plane disappeared into a cloud of dirt and grass. Then a silence filled the cockpit. The engine had stopped. The propeller blades were bent backward over the nose. Broken, the plane leaned to the left. Yet against all odds, he had made it. Just then, however, a dozen Americans ran up and, thinking he was German, pointed their rifles into his face. They were screaming and threatening to shoot him. Bewildered, he yelled back, "F off! I'm Captain Carr of this goddamn squadron!" But they couldn't hear him. Finally, the 354th Fighter Group's commander, Colonel George Bickell, walked up. Recognizing Carr, he ordered the men to lower their rifles, stepped onto the grounded wing of the Focke-Wulf, leaned into the cockpit, and said, "Carr, where in hell have you been?" It's a great story. Too bad none of it actually happened, despite all those articles and the famous video. The truth is, Carr did take an FW-190, but that was after the Second World War had ended in Europe, and it wasn't exactly his finest hour. At the time, the 354th Fighter Group was assigned to occupation duty. They were based at Ansbach, Germany, and everyone was bored. Young guys being young guys, they started borrowing things from former German military bases. And why not? The Wehrmacht and the Luftwaffe were no more. Major Jim Dalgleish, the commanding officer of another outfit, the 353rd, even found his own Focke-Wulf FW-190A fighter plane. When Lieutenant Carr saw that, he decided to get one for himself too. So he hitchhiked to a former Luftwaffe airbase near Linz, Austria, and found a flyable FW-190 parked there. For safety, he arranged a flight of his own fellow pilots in their P-51s to escort him back to their base. It went perfectly until he arrived back at Ansbach. Once overhead, he couldn't figure out how to put the wheels down, so he had to belly it in. Thus, the famous film that shows him walking around the plane is really just him happy that he survived a crash landing. Setting this made-up story aside, what Lieutenant Carr did accomplish, however, is far more amazing. He was an ace, with 14 enemy planes confirmed as shot down in combat. In the spring of 1945, he earned the Distinguished Flying Cross for leading his flight of 4 P-51s to attack over 60 German airplanes. They shot down 7 without loss. Carr got 5 that day. Yet those achievements were overshadowed by a made-up tall tale of the greatest escape that never was. And you know what? I think it's time we put the fake story to bed once and for all, and show Lieutenant Carr and his fellow airmen the respect they truly deserve. I'm Thomas Van Hare, and this is Historic Wings. Please subscribe and click like. And remember, there's always more to the story.